The princess's man 34, I am sorry, Will started, and Alicia silenced him with another kiss. You have nothing to be sorry for, Will. We were betrayed. Alicia said, poison dripping from her voice at that statement. Yes, and they were dealt with. Will said, proffering his arm to Alicia, who took it. Now I must be a good guest and go see our host. I have things to say to him. Even Alicia shivered at the notes in Will's tone as he said that, but she walked arm in arm with him nonetheless, knowing full well that there was no safer place for her than at his side. They walked down the hall, and Will pushed open the doors to the hall where Marduk waited, sitting on the ancient throne that once belonged to a demon lord. Welcome, Princess Alicia, thank you for continuing to be my guest. Who is your escort? He seems rather strange. I see notes of human, orc, and elf. But he has to be more than that. You are a special kind of mutt, aren't you? Marduk said with a smile at Will. Hello, Marduk, you must be the pretend king of the thieves that I have heard so much about, Will said. Well, I don't know about pretend, but I am the king of the thieves. Well, of the 2 or 3 that will be left after today, maybe. Will said, but you were never a king and never will be now. I intend to deal with you. And my grandparents will ensure your men outside die. You are the grandson of someone outside? Marduk asked, seemingly unconcerned. Well, I do hope they can figure out how to get through the isolation barrier before you die, young man. Oh, I am not worried. Will stepped forward. I heard that you were making Alicia fight. Oh, I was, Marduk laughed. Every day I gave the little tart a choice to fuck or fight. She chose to fight every day. I have to say she surprised me, winning more often than not. Alicia could feel every muscle in Will's arm tense. Will smiled. Well, it sounds like I need to give you a choice then. Oh really, boy? Marduk was amused, and it showed that he did not understand what was happening. And what choice would that be? The oldest choice. One that is hard-coded into humans. Fight or flight. You can fight or run. I would suggest running, but I don't imagine that you can outrun me. I know that you can't outfight me, so I will give you a different choice instead. Will had stepped forward from Alicia. And mana was gathering around him and welling up from inside him. Do you wish to die slowly, painfully, or quickly, and in agony? Marduk wanted to laugh, but he could feel the mana that this boy was gathering. You are the one who arrived and broke the gates? It was all you? I thought it was a group of mages working together. I don't need help, Will said, and then plodded forward, his mana growing denser with every passing moment. Marduk chuckled when Will stuck an invisible barrier. You see, the demon lord who ruled this place had a last stand spell that I was able to trigger. It makes it so the keep is isolated from the rest of the fortress, and the throne is isolated from the rest of the keep. You think that? Marduk's voice trailed off, and he began to sweat when Will stuck out a hand, closed his eyes, and then began to pump insane amounts of mana into the barrier. The barrier and the building itself seemed to shudder. Mana seeped out of the building, and the defensive spells flowed into Will, who was compressing the mana more and more into himself. Marduk panicked and pulled up the hidden trapdoor at the foot of the throne, jumping down the escape hatch and running along a familiar tunnel. Will watched this happen calmly. Alicia was distraught. He's getting away. Will chuckled as he felt the defensive spells shatter and absorb into him along with the residuals of the magical wave he had ridden here. If these buildings are in the way, then they should simply vanish, Will spoke, and the world seemed to freeze for everyone in the keep and the entire fortress. At that moment, the stones of the buildings vibrated and then vanished. Those on walls fell to the ground. The ancient fortress of Goron what ceased to be. True to Will's intent. No subterranean structures were harmed, and Will led Alicia into the hole that was all that remained of the plinth the throne had been on. Gotro Ilan, the fight was going well. Will had shattered the gates, opening a way for the Gobran to take the fortress when orcs had fought tooth and nail to slay the demon lord. who was mutating their people into monsters. They were working to break the defenses that had been activated on the inner keep when the spell shattered, and an incredible amount of mana had rushed inward toward where Elan detected Will. Will is doing something, Elan said to her husband. That boy is always doing something, Gotro said, punching through the shield of a thief that had picked the wrong orc to attack. No, he is. Elan froze, as did everyone at the sight of the ancient fortress, and the only thing that could be heard was a single word spoken in Will's voice, and it held enough power that many trembled to behold it. Vanish, that was all that was said, and the world responded, removing the fortress and all its above-ground structures in an instant. Gotro looked at his wife. Should we be worried, my dear? Elan was pale. I choose to ignore what I cannot understand. Understood. Gotro turned to yell at those under his command and began rounding up the thieves and bandits one by one. Elan saw Will and Alicia disappear into a tunnel and smiled, glad she had called in the favor she was owed. Will and Alicia. Will walked with Alicia behind him down the tunnel. Two voices could be heard in the distance. What do you mean, you stupid dwarf? Marduk screeched, I mean that you have angered the wrong people. Stupid wannabe king. A Nighthammer dwarf replied. The last of the Gilshariburm has called in a favor. We are not to help you. I came to collect what was due from you and to terminate our agreement. Will smiled as he listened while he walked, reminding himself to buy his grandmother something nice. Marduk spoke again, panic rising in his voice. You fear the Gilshariburm more than me, infinitely so. The dwarf said, you might kill one of us, she would kill all of us. And to hear it said her grandson is a monster, unlike anything you have ever seen. Will chose that moment to step out from the last corner of the tunnel. Well, I don't know that I'm what I would call a monster. The Nighthammer dwarf took one look at Will and Alicia, and his eyebrows shot up. It's you, lass. Hello again, Mr. Dwarf, Alicia said with a tired smile. Marduk let out a frustrated scream. Take me away from here this instant. The dwarf looked at Marduk, and then looked at Will, and then turned his back on Marduk. Will moved and had his hand around the neck of the wannabe king of thieves. Marduk scratched at Will, but Will did not care. Will smiled and squeezed tighter. You lose. The crack of bones signified the end of the thief king. Will looked back at Alicia just in time to catch her as she collapsed. Her body finally let her fall into a deep, well-earned slumber. Will turned back to the dwarf. Good day, sir. Stones be with you and the lass. Tell her to seek me out in Colt. The dwarf said, starting to go through the pockets of the dead king. The princess's man, 35, Alicia was having good dreams, mostly featuring Will and the adventures that she had been on with him. When she woke, she expected to be in a cot in some military camp, but she was surprised to find herself in her bed at Coltsheld Castle. She stretched and groaned as she did so, which prompted several maids to come in. How did I get here? Alicia asked as the maids helped her dress and prepare for the day. Your man brought you in, about 5 hours ago. One of the maids said, it caused a right commotion when he showed up. The other maid said, the court wizard started panicking, stating that there was a massive wave of mana coming to destroy the castle. But then your man skidded to a stop about a mile out from the castle, with you sleeping in his arms. He carried you here, and dropped you off. Where is Will now? Alicia asked, wondering just how Will had been able to get them here so quickly. As far as we know, he is with His Majesty. One of the maids said, and at the same time a knock on the door silenced them all. The door opened to reveal the head maid. Princess, your father has requested your presence. The older woman said before leaving. Alicia smiled, well, I guess it is time to go play my part in whatever conundrum Will has cooked up. Roughly 20 minuets later, Alicia walked into the audience hall of the king. And both her parents rose to hug her, asking if she was all right. Will was there, wearing nicer clothes than she had ever seen him wear. She looked between her father and Will. What happened to Vilter? We received a report that he was executed for trying to escape after we departed after you. Her father said, with a smile, I think that he knew anything that came back to him would be worse than simple death. Alicia shrugged. To be honest, she was surprised. Will had not crushed the man the moment he laid eyes on him. Her father gestured for Alicia to take her seat and she did so. Will stood in front of Alicia and her family facing them, and the court was present. Will Garrow, son of the hero Brock Garrow, her father was speaking in his official voice, grandson of the rulers of the Gobran Collective, and princess's man to Alicia Terrace Coltshelg. You have performed a task for the kingdom, and for me personally that I doubt I can ever repay, but I must ask, what would you have as a reward? Alicia looked at Will with curiosity, and saw the mischievous smile on his lips. Will bowed slightly and spoke. Your Majesty, I would ask for the hand of the princess if she will have me. A gasp ran through the assembled nobles, as even though he was the son of the hero, and related to the leaders of another country, he was still technically a commoner. The king raised his voice. Silence. Will, are you sure that is what you would ask for? I could give you nearly anything. Will ignored the king and knelt on one knee before the princess. Alicia Terrace Coltshelg, I am not much, but if you would have me, I would ask you to marry me. So will you make me the happiest man in the world and be my wife? Alicia was suddenly out of breath, and unable to speak, so she simply nodded her head yes as tears of joy formed in her eyes. She looked to her father expectantly, and prayed he would try to contest this. Alicia was surprised when her father smiled at her, tears in his eyes. Is this what you want, my daughter? Alicia nodded fervently, and her father chuckled. Very well. I announce the betrothal of Will Garrow and Alicia Terrace Coltshelg. A roar traveled up the crowd. The guards who had all spared with Will were cheering, the nobles were not happy. Cries of dismay rang out. The king raised his hand for silence. I will hear 2 complaints, make them good. The nobles quickly clustered and muttered amongst themselves for a moment before a man who looked ancient stepped forward. Your Majesty, we have come up with the 2 complaints we would have you hear. Firstly is the complaint of many of the nobles who have young sons that would have had the opportunity to court the princess. Will they be able to challenge for this right? The king looked like he wanted to laugh. I suppose that until they are wed those who are willing are allowed to challenge Will to single combat. Will spoke up, I intend for us to be wed within the week, so I will give you 7 days. Send your children to me, and I will send them back to you in at least one piece. His comment was not missed by several nobles who had looked excited at the prospect, but now feared for their children more than worried about any accolades. The ancient man nodded. We accept this, and any challenges will be delivered before 7 days are up. Now our second complaint is that one of the primary duties of the princess, if she does not wed into the nobles' lines of the kingdom, is to secure relations with a kingdom through marriage. If this needs to happen and she is married, what will happen? The king sighed. I tasked this young man with retrieving my daughter, and he blew through at least 1 kingdom, and wiped one of the ancient forts from the face of this world. I challenge you to find a more tactically sound asset to secure than Will. Well, do you have anything to say to this? Should they wish to offer a challenge, I will accept, but know that if anyone should threaten me or my family, which will include the royal family of Colt after our marriage, I will treat it as if I had been personally attacked. Will said all of this letting a chilling wave of mana pulse out from him, but I am not an unreasonable man, and I am willing to forge alliances just as I am willing to enforce those alliances. There was silence after that, and the king rose smiling. Well then, in 7 days, return here for a royal wedding. The princess's man 36, the week flew by for Alicia, who was rushed from place to place, fitted for a dress, and asked her opinion on 1,000 things. Will was there for much of it, an ever-present shadow of protection and power. But on the day of their wedding, she could not find him, and instead several maids were rushing her to and fro, first to be bathed, then to be dressed, as the bells tolled, and the great doors opened into the massive temple where they were holding the wedding. Elisha caught sight of Will standing tall with his unnatural-looking eyes emitting a golden light that seemed to radiate the joy he was feeling. The musicians played a slow-moving march for her to walk down the aisle escorted by her father. Her brother was easily sighted with a beautiful young woman to the side of the aisle. On the podium next to Will stood Trina, in full goddess mode, with divine light radiating from her. As her father gave her a loving hug and she stepped up next to Will, the goddess leaned down and, in a low tone, spoke only to her. "I am glad that I was not right and that you did not listen to me." Elisha smiled as the goddess straightened and called for silence. When she had it, she spoke. Like every royal wedding, there were many speeches made by the king and priests of different gods and goddesses. Finally Trina spoke the lines that Elisha was waiting for most. "Wilgaro, do you take Princess Elisha Terrace Kultscheld to be your wedded wife? Do you swear by the gods and by your mana to care for her and those you both hold dear? Will you cherish and love her with all your heart? Do you swear to love her and only her for as long as you may live?" "I do," Will said with a smile that seemed to radiate light. Trina smiled and turned to Elisha. "Princess Elisha Terrace Kultscheld, do you take Wilgaro to be your wedded husband? Do you swear by the gods and by your mana to care for him and those you both hold dear? Will you cherish and love him with all your heart? Do you swear to love him and only him for as long as you may live?" "I do," Elisha said with butterflies in her heart. "Then, with the blessing of the king, and by my own divine right, I bond thee. Forevermore, you will be Wilgaro and Elisha Kultscheld Garo. Let it be known from this moment to the end of time." Trina clapped her hands together, and a wave of power washed outwards from her hands. Blessing the union of the two young people, a cheer washed over the crowd as flower petals rained down from the roof of the cathedral. Will leaned forward, lifting the veil from Elisha's face, and kissed her deeply. They walked out of the cathedral to an assembled mass of people numbering in the 10,000s, and a massive roar of approval washed over the crowd. They made their way back to the castle, waving to well-wishers and anyone who called out to them. By the time they made it to the castle, the sun was setting, and it was time for bed. Several days later, after the couple had only surfaced for food and the occasional moonlit walk around the gardens, Will and Elisha went to see the king. "Father, Will and I intend to head back to the settlement," Elisha said. "So soon?" the king said with a slight frown. "But I guess you were interrupted in what you were trying to build. We will leave on the next ship if it is all right with you, sir," Will said. "I am fine with it. The next ship leaves in 4 days, I believe." The king frowned and looked at his daughter, the facade of royalty falling away, leaving only a father who loved his daughter. "Will you return home, Elisha?" Elisha smiled and hugged her father. "Of course I will. One day. I promise." 4 days later, Will and Elisha waved to the crowd of people who had come to see them off. They smiled at their friends and family, knowing that it might be many years before they returned this time. Elisha placed her hand on the rail, and they watched the sun set behind the kingdom of Kult as it sank into the distance. "Do you think that we are making the right choice?" Elisha asked. "As long as I am with you, it will always be the right choice," Will said, placing his chin on top of Elisha's head. "Well, I guess if you are my husband now, I am stuck with you." Her tone was teasing. "True," Will shrugged. "I wonder what that means for the future. I guess I will be needing a new bodyguard." "Oh, I'll guard your body," Will said with a seductive tone, and they both laughed. "I love you, Will. I think I loved you from the moment I laid eyes on you." Elisha said, hugging the massive bicep of the arm Will had wrapped around her. "I love you too, Elisha," Will said, his smile evident on his voice. "The sun dipping lower on the horizon, and you need to remember one thing." "What's that?" Elisha said, turning to look up at Will. He smiled a cheeky smile, kissing her before he spoke. "I will always be thankful for my time in the past and in the future as the princess's man."